Welcome to Independent Sources. I'm Diana Vinca.
And I'm Garry Pierre-Pierre. The clash between the Obama administration and Israel over a new settlement in East Jerusalem is just the latest between the two governments. The U.S. administration fears the new constructions will once again derail plans for peace talks between Israelis and Palestinians.
On this edition of Independent Sources, we look at the conflict and the coverage, what's being said in the Jewish media and by grassroots groups on the ground in Israel.
We explore the impact of women on ethnic and immigrant media.
We report on the ongoing efforts to enlist the ethnic media in selling the census.
And we profile a radio host with a Latino perspective who says he seeks to set the record straight.
We'll have these stories and news of the week after this.
There are other larger issues and more important issues that need to be covered that we have to ensure that are in there, because folks will not find it in the Times or in some of the other papers. We have to make sure that that news that is ignored or missed, that we pick that up from week to week.
The recent dispute between Israel and the U.S. is not the first time the two governments have clashed over Israeli settlements. Joining me to get some understanding into how this is playing in the press and on the ground is J.J. Goldberg of The Forward. Also with us via Skype from Israel is Micha Kurz of Grassroots Jerusalem, a website that reports on the activities of grassroots organizations in that area. Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
Micha, let's start with you. Why Grassroots Jerusalem?
Why Grassroots Jerusalem? Well, for one, a lot of the discourse that happens in mainstream media is a lot about politics and what politicians are up to. Labor and Likud in Israel versus Hamas and Fatah, and how the Obama administration is dealing with both. And a lot of people don't realize what's actually happening on the ground every day. And municipal policies in Jerusalem, and how Palestinian and Israelis and international activists in Jerusalem are dealing with the reality on the ground.
And how do you do that exactly, Micha? Give us a sense of how do you cover the grassroots in Israel?
Well, you know, to understand what's going on in Jerusalem, you need to kind of understand a little bit about the context. I grew up in a Jewish neighborhood in Jerusalem and almost never even stepped foot in Palestinian Jerusalem, and to understand the differences, you have to understand the differences in municipal policy when it comes to the different neighborhoods. I grew up in a green neighborhood with community gardens and good schools, youth movements, and today when you cross the street, literally into a Palestinian neighborhood in Jerusalem, you'll usually cross the street from one western neighborhood into an eastern shanty town, where since there are no infrastructure plans from the municipality, there's sewage in the streets, poor waste management. Children are going to school in turns because there aren't enough buildings for schools. There's a big difference between Israeli and Palestinian neighborhoods just to begin with.
Okay.
Let alone peace process.
Okay. JJ, give us a sense of these grassroots movement in Israel. Is this a new phenomenon, and how effective have they been in bringing people together and telling the story from a different perspective?
I would guess that Micha could tell you better than I can. My sense from here and from my visits there is that the grassroots groups that meet in the middle, that try and reach for understanding, are under siege these days because there's a level of anger that's developed on both sides, for understandable reasons on both sides in terms of the actions of the governments and the political leaders. Getting past that and reaching people on the ground and saying to them things could be better, there's almost a hopelessness now in a lot of places. So it's a difficult communication.
Okay. How about that, Micha? How effective have you been? Is your concept new, or did you borrow the concept from someone else? Who started this movement?
I can't say that the concept is a new concept. I think there have always been Israeli and Palestinian and international grassroots activists around here. I think over the last few years, people have become very weary of politics. And so it's been less and less about political structure and more networking on the ground. And when it comes to how successful they are, I think the mainstream media has a very hard time covering it because of the lack of politics. But when it comes to a community that transcends the religious, ethnic, and political differences, it's definitely there. And I'd very much like for people in New York and in the States to realize that there is a community here that's worth supporting, that's worth hearing about, and less putting our setting our eyes on what the politicians are going to come up with, because so far they're the ones who are not successful.
Okay. JJ, give us a sense of how the Forward has been covering the latest developments in the Israeli-Palestinian and U.S. administration conflict, if you will.
In general, we've been trying to walk down the center, to present both sides as they see themselves. Sometimes hard to define what constitutes both sides. This week, for example, well, last week there was a memo that came out from General Petraeus, the chief of the Central Command of the United States military, that he sent to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Admiral Mullen. This came in January, I guess, saying that Israel's inability to make peace and America's inability to influence Israel to move toward peace is hurting America's efforts to cooperate. It's stiffening opposition to America or making it harder to cooperate with American allies like moderate Arabs. Now, this is received in the Jewish community as an attack.
Attack on home.
It's an attack on Israel. It's an attack on Israeli policies. The National Director of the Anti-Defamation League, Abe Foxman, called it another example of blaming the Jews. Now, that resonates, I think, with a lot of people, and we, in our coverage of this issue today, we've got quotes from a number of members of Congress, both Democrats and Republicans, reacting not quite as strongly as Foxman, but saying, yes, this is an overreaction. You can't draw a connection between what Israel does to defend itself. On the other hand, Israel has been saying for years, our security is America's security. We're in the same fight. America has an interest in keeping us safe. And so to say that America has an interest in Israel's security and then pretend Israel doesn't have an interest in helping America is, I think it's running away from things. But the Forward, I'm a commentator now. I don't set the editorial policy, and I think the Forward needs to take that kind of a central line to show that the Jewish community, by and large, seems to be upset by this kind of language. On the other hand, it's coming from very serious, plausible, mainstream people, like the General Staff of the American military.
Okay. Micha, give us a sense of what's happening on the ground in Jerusalem right now.
There's quite a disconnect between Israelis' very right-wing extreme politicians and what people are feeling on the ground here in Jerusalem. I think Israeli mainstream politicians know how to push buttons in order to keep funding coming from the U.S. government. But when it comes to Jewish voices, there are more and more Jewish voices both in Israel and in the United States that are stepping up and saying that this occupation of Palestinian territory is detrimental to the cause, and the Israeli policies today have to stop. They are not only do they not follow Jewish values, they're corrupting the fabric of our basic society. And in the meantime, while more and more people are getting involved on the ground here with nonviolent direct action movements, both on the Israeli side and on the Palestinian side, Israeli politicians that seem to be still stuck on pushing the security card over and over and over again, and that works so well with mainstream media, don't seem to be actually affecting the change in the kind of life that we eventually will have to be living here in Jerusalem, and a life that means sharing the land with the people that have been here for generations.
JJ, you've often said, just earlier you mentioned that the Forward tries to walk a middle ground, whatever that middle ground is. As an ethnic and community journalist, how do you find yourself not taking sides? So sometimes you are drawn into the situation?
Well, for me personally, I've been traveling a lot lately, and I find that wherever I go, the audiences I speak to respond very positively. They're used to hearing people saying either Israel should not give up anything, Israel should not grant any concessions to the Palestinian side because the Palestinians have responded with violence, or Israel should make concessions and make Palestinian life easier, perhaps pull back and allow for a Palestinian state because of the Palestinian suffering. Now, my position, which I think I share with a lot of mainstream Israelis, is that Israel needs to pull back for its own sake. There is a tremendous amount of hostility on both sides, and as long as they're both living together under one sovereignty, as they are now, there's going to be tension, there's going to be violence, and the Israeli army is going to be sending its young people in to act as policemen and almost like prison guards, keeping the occupation down. Whereas if Israel were to pull back, yes, the Palestinians would have a state, yes, Israel would have its security and a border it knows how to defend. And when people hear that peace is good for both sides, first of all for their own side, they say, well, that makes sense. They don't hear that very much. And as Micha said, the mainstream politicians have an vested interest, I think. Now, I have to say, from what he said, the mainstream politicians in Israel are elected. People are voting for parties that call for a hard line. And I think they're voting for that much in the same way that they voted for George Bush here, thinking, well, he talks tough, so he'll make the concession, he'll drive a harder bargain, not realizing frequently that they're voting for people who will never make a bargain.
Unfortunately, we've run out of time. J.J. Goldberg of The Forward and Micha Kurz of Grassroots Jerusalem, thanks for talking with us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Now here's Marlene Peralta with some other news.
Thanks, Gary. Here's a look at some headlines from the ethnic media. El Diario La Prensa reveals in a special series of editorials that women who have been raped crossing the border have been denied abortion services, while other detainees have died in custody of the Immigration and Customs Enforcement. The paper also says that the Obama administration has moved to revise the policies to address concerns about detention conditions. The Weekly Gleaner reports that Jamaica has been bashed again by the U.S. government. The annual country report on human rights practices has condemned the Caribbean island for holding children in adult prisons. This is the second low grade Jamaica has received from Washington in just 2 weeks. Recently, the annual Narcotics Control Strategy report criticized the island's drug policing. A well-known Irish peace activist had his current U.S. visa revoked by the U.S. Embassy. Edward Horgan, who has traveled to the U.S. on many occasions, told the Irish Voice that he has no idea what prompted the authorities to make that decision. The 64-year-old Horgan has peacefully protested the U.S. military's use of the Shannon Airport in West Ireland to refuel its warplanes heading to Iraq and Afghanistan. Horgan has been arrested for minor offenses, such as obstructing an airport officer and displaying an anti-war banner from a boat on the River Shannon. From the Amsterdam News, Black community leaders in New York are worried about the future of an African burial ground located under the Bus Depot on East 126th Street in Harlem. The New York Department of Transportation and the Metropolitan Transit Authority will reconstruct the Bus Depot as part of the expansion of the Willis Avenue Bridge. The Harlem African Burial Task Force, whose members include Congressman Charles Rangel and Councilwoman Melissa Mark Viverito, want the land to be recognized as a historic landmark to preserve the African burial ground. And finally, Caribbean Life reports a nursing shortage across English-speaking Caribbean nations. The news was released in a new report from the World Bank that attributes the trend to the aging population, which has increased the demand for quality health care, and the migration of a high number of nurses to the U.S., Canada, and the United Kingdom. Those are just a few headlines from the ethnic media. Vianora, back to you.
Thanks, Marlene. March is Women's History Month, and we want to take a look at how women are doing in our profession, journalism. Not long ago, the Washington Post ran an article about the feminization of TV news. Today, 2 of the 3 broadcast networks have a woman anchoring the nightly news. Women are still a minority in mainstream newspaper newsrooms, around 40%. But even there, the numbers have increased. Is this feminization phenomena also occurring in ethnic and immigrant media? Here with me to discuss the issue is Juana Ponce de León of the New York Community Media Alliance. Also here, Aleksandra Slabisz of the Polish daily Nowy Dziennik, and Chiu of World Journal, a Chinese language daily. Welcome.
Hi, nice to be here.
Juana, are we seeing a feminization of the ethnic media? Is that the right word to use?
I mean, I find that when one uses that word, feminization, feminism, and so on, for me as an editorial person, I am looking for coverage that actually focuses in on women's issues and development of beats that deal with women's issues. I'm not necessarily thinking in terms of, how many women are sitting, staffing, staffing publications.
But to start off, let's talk about the numbers and clear that out of the way. Are we seeing an increased number of women working in the ethnic media as we see in the mainstream?
In our organization, the New York Community Media Alliance, when we launch programs such as an education fellowship, and we send out a call for applications, and it's sent out broadly, the number of women applying for the possibility of participating is less. It's usually about a third of the applications. So if one were to use some sort of Rorschach test and say, well, the response to what we do, the presence of women is not as strong as men, then I can say that perhaps it mirrors mainstream. But we have not taken a poll. I don't think that there are statistics specific to that question that you're posing. Not that I know.
Well, Christine, what's the situation at the World Journal? You were telling me that the number of women working at the paper is in pretty much equal number as the men.
Yes, at the newspaper we have a very equal representation of both men and women. For the total number of female employee at the news department, we have about slightly higher number of women than men. Whereas as for the managerial positions, we have slightly higher male than females. So I think in the newsroom, the representation is not an issue for our newspaper.
Well, let's talk about the issue that Juana brought up. What about the topics that women at the World Journal are covering? Since the presence is equal, are there women's issues covered as much as men's issues?
I think at the newspaper we are trained, we were all trained as professionals. So when we work on news, take myself as example, I've worked as a journalist for 3 decades. And when I go out and cover news, it never occurred to me that I am now working as a female journalist. It never occurred to me. We make judgment just by the importance and the nature of the news. Of course, at the same time, I would not deny that the fact that I am a woman journalist helps me on issues that women tend to have more sensibility and more understanding. So I think at times the fact that we are women is a plus to us.
Let me pass the ball to Aleksandra and ask, are you covering any specific women's issue for Nowy Dziennik?
I would say women-related issues or things that are primarily of interest to women. I'm in charge of the health column and education column, and I also contribute to the Metro section, in which we do cover a lot of social as well as political issues. And among the social issues, we do come up with topics like, for example, unhealthy relationships, or situation of nannies in New York, or family caregivers, which are primarily jobs taken by immigrant women here. As far as health, this is a column called Health and Beauty. Obviously, I'm pretty sure it's 99% read by women. And education, I think, is also very important for our female part of readers. It's usually, from my experience, the mother who is in charge of the kids' education, so usually the woman going to PTA meetings, thinking about the choice of the school. When I have to find some sources for my education stories, it's usually the women that I give a call.
Juana, what issues would you like to see surfacing in the
well,
ethnic press?
I mean, in the two examples, for instance, the women and the work that they do, or the women as being, let's say, the primary caretakers in terms of making sure that the family gets educated properly, rather than there being some sort of contextualizing or framing that says this is a trend. This is something that is happening in our community, where we have, and the workforce, the women workforce represents X percentage. That so that there's a real understanding of what's going on in the community. That these are not isolated cases, So and I find that the reason oftentimes that this doesn't happen is because the messaging, between, say, advocacy groups here that are looking at women's issues, or government agencies that are looking at women's issues, they don't send information to these reporters, so that that connective tissue is pretty deficient. So even if you are wanting to say, how many professionals are being nannies now, where is that information? Where can you get this information? And so that's when I talk about, the feminization of something, to be able to say this is, this represents, 5,000 women, 10,000 women, 40,000 women, and then it gives a real picture of what the woman's role is, rather than anecdotal. It becomes really substantive. So that's what I'm saying.
And unfortunately, we are out of time. Juana Ponce de León, Aleksandra Slabisz, and Chiu, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us.
We'll be right back.
You promised me the world. Is this what you had in mind?
Help EarthShare and its members restore balance to the world. Visit earthshare.org and see what you can do. EarthShare, one environment, one simple way to care for it.
By now, you may have received your census form, but have you sent it back? An estimated 3 million people were missed in the 2000 census, many in immigrant communities, where people are often afraid of giving the government information. State and local officials have been trying to reassure residents that the census has no interest in immigration status. Garry reports on the ongoing effort to get the ethnic media to help get out that message.
With the deadline for mailing the census form looming, New York elected officials have increased their campaign to convince every New Yorker that it is in their best interest to submit the form.
And the important message here is that if you don't get counted, you essentially don't exist.
By April 15th, state and city officials are hoping that all New Yorkers are counted, unlike the Census 2000, when an estimated 200,000 New Yorkers were missed.
This was such an important endeavor for us as the state level, because we knew that the actions taken from this period, this census, will have 10-year implications on this state.
The officials took their message last week to the ethnic and community media during a news conference at the CUNY Graduate School of Journalism. They emphasized the point that the census information will not affect people's immigration status.
The census is not coming to anyone's name. It is coming to the residents in that home. And what we need people to do is to fill out the information of the people who live in that home. It doesn't ask your citizenship status. It doesn't ask whether you are legally here or not, or your immigration status.
For every person who is not counted, New York State loses about $3,000, a huge sum when you consider that thousands of New Yorkers, particularly immigrants, do not fill out the census form. Yet, they still need social services provided by the state and the city. For independent sources, I'm Garry Pierre-Pierre. Howard Jordan has a long history of advocating for Latinos and building alliances with New York's other ethnic communities. His radio show, The Jordan Journal, presents a Latino perspective on the news. Jordan says he seeks to set the record straight. We end our show with this profile by Judith Escalona.
That's why you got to use the resources like the Jordan Journal to out people, to basically out them and have them make their case in front of an audience where you can debate the issue that they're raising.
You need to start 5 or 6, okay? All right. You ready?
For 3 years, Jordan's Journal has been saturating the airwaves with a very unique Latino perspective and a clear mission.
I view as two things: to elevate the struggle of now largely Latino communities in the United States, because I've got more broader in my thinking, and to foment intra-group unity among communities of color and progressive communities in the United States. So that's why I put so much of an emphasis of Latino and African American relations.
A veteran journalist, Howard Jordan had a regular column in Newsday. He was also a reporter for Hoy, the national Spanish language daily that closed in 2009. Jordan launched New York's first English language Latino newspaper in the 80s. It was called Latino News and lasted for about a year.
I think people are looking to create a climate where they're going to do physical harm to Barack Obama.
Every Friday between 5 and 6 p.m. on WBAI 95.5 FM in New York City, you can hear him interviewing local and national leaders on the issues of the day, offering insights only a political insider can provide.
We formed an organization called LUPA, Latinos United for Political Action. We had, it was me, Roberto Ramirez, of all people, and Apolinar Trinidad, who was part of the Dominican leadership within the group. And our goal was to elect progressive people to office.
We have a candidate that replaced
A keen observer, Jordan, who is also a tenured professor at Hostos Community College, is responsive to his students and sees the journal evolving.
The next thing I'm trying to do is bring in younger populations through the students and other people that can talk about how young people view things drastically different. Because I noticed things right away that, we assume that young people are connected. I tell my students, young lords, they think it's a religious organization.
For Howard Jordan, mentoring youth and continuing Jordan's Journal is part of leaving a legacy and establishing continuity with the past. I'm Judith Escalona for Independent Sources.
That's our show. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again next week.
In the meantime, be independent-minded.